American politics often seems like one continuous loop of elections and campaigns. Some states have just completed the voting totals for the 2022 midterms, and we already have a spate of politicians who have formally announced or are strongly insinuating that they intend to run for president in 2024, and are even actively campaigning for an election that is still 1 year and 8 months away. This is not the normal state of affairs. Other countries have tightly regimented election cycles where all explicit and formal campaigning is banned until a few months before the election. Though how much difference that really makes in practice is in dispute, where all the known candidates go right up to the line in campaigning for just as long as the American candidates do. Though the U.S. is somewhat unique in that we seem to be in a state of permanent campaign mode. The dominance of punditry and horse race journalism, the incessant and unbelievably boring chatter about who is leading polls and who is and is not a viable candidate, often drown out, seemingly by design, the most substantive debates that we ought to be having. While this is undoubtedly annoying, especially if your work requires paying attention to all of this, it can have a positive effect in stimulating meaningful political debates, providing one has candidates who are offering new, worthwhile, substantive, and thought-through ideas that advance and elevate political thought and encourage us to think and reason from first principles. That can have a cleansing effect by liberating us from dreary political slogans and familiar cliches, and start to rethink how we view political debate. But that requires having candidates willing to take risks by offering unconventional ideas, accompanied by the capacity to defend them and answer questions about them in a direct and just normal human way. Such is the case for the Ohio-born Vivek Ramaswamy, who is now a declared candidate for the Republican nomination for president. Though only 37, Vivek has compiled a series of impressive private sector successes, particularly his 2014 founding of the biotech company Roivant Sciences, that has left him with a reported net worth in excess of $500 million. Since stepping out from that company, he has clearly made a concerted effort to enter and make his mark on political discourse in the United States, culminating in publication of his 2021 book, Woke Inc., a book I read before publication at his request and liked so much that I blurbed, and that details how corporate power has been exploited by America's most powerful entities in corporate America, academia, and politics to impose what he calls the, quote, modern woke industrial complex on the country, all as a means of stifling real debate and controlling human behavior for its benefit. I've gotten to know Vivek a bit over the last couple of years, and there's no question that he is very smart, an original and independent thinker. But as the interview we're about to show you demonstrates, there are definitely some disagreements I have with him, some held quite passionately, but I really believe that our politics generally and the 2024 presidential debate in particular will be significantly improved by his participation. And it was in that spirit that we asked him to come onto our show for what I hope and expect will be the first of many interviews with him and other candidates running in 2024 as well as that presidential campaign approaches. Here's the interview with Vivek. We hope you enjoy it as much as we did. Vivek, first of all, congratulations on this big announcement. It's obviously an important milestone in someone's life to run for president. I'm sure it's not an easy one, but I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
It's good to talk again, Glenn. How you doing?
Yeah, doing great. So there's obviously no shortage of other candidates in this Republican primary. We have people who represent lots of different ideological divisions, which the Republican Party, I think, positively is confronting. There's people with lots of different experiences, including some people who are from Washington, some who aren't. You have obviously Trump and DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence and potentially Chris Christie and John Sununu and probably a bunch of others. If you hadn't run, what would this race be lacking that only you can provide?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things, Glenn, but I think I'm the only true outsider in this race. Actually, you get to be an outsider once. That's what Trump brought in 2015 and 2016. And I think if you're going to run the federal government, especially with a plan to gut, and I really mean gut the managerial bureaucracy, restore a system of governance in America where the people who we elect to run the government are the ones who actually run the government rather than this cancerous federal bureaucracy. You need somebody who's actually willing to do this and not a product of the very system that gave us that managerial bureaucracy. And in my case, look, I bring two different dimensions to this. One of them I think you're more familiar with in the last few years. I have been, as something of a writer, written 3 books, a scholar, if I may say so, from of the Constitution, somebody who actually brings a quasi-academic perspective to deeply understanding the Constitution, but actually not as an academic, but as somebody who's been a chief executive, built and run multi-billion-dollar enterprises, and who understands that, for example, if you tell me that somebody works for me, but I can't fire them, they don't actually work for me. That means I work for them. And bringing an understanding of the Constitution and an exercise of executive power that can actually run the executive branch effectively. It's probably one of the most important things that I bring to this race that's different. The other thing, Glenn, is I'm not running on somebody else's vision. You get a lot of professional politicians that'll, get prepped before an interview like this one with a binder with 9 points in it about the points you're supposed to hit. And there's moments in American history where maybe you need an implementer, somebody who takes a Social Security reform plan or a 999 tax plan or whatever, and then implements someone else's vision. I'm running on a vision to restore a missing national American identity. I think our nation is in the middle of a national identity crisis. It's one that I've diagnosed, been writing about, traveling the country speaking about for the last 3 years in the form of 3 books in the last 18 months and otherwise. Here, I'm translating my own vision. And I think the difference is, unlike 1980, the threats to liberty in America today are not just in the form of big government. It's a complicated threat combining big government, big business, even cultural hegemony that requires somebody who understands that in a first personal way, in a bone deep way. And I think that too is part of what I bring to this field. And we're already seeing it. If I may say so myself, 3 weeks into this race, a lot of the ideas that we have ourselves advanced in this campaign are now already being picked up by the other candidates, which I'm flattered by, and I think that's important and that's great. But I think we live in a moment where we can't just have somebody who's a follower of someone else's ideas. We have to actually have a leader who's willing to actually have the conviction to take on the kinds of issues that I'm taking on that other Republicans even won't touch. From ending affirmative action, I've been explicit on that, to abandoning this climate cult and the demands it makes on the United States, but not on other countries, using the military to take out the Mexican drug cartels, abolishing the Department of Education. These are things that, at least when I started saying them, no other even Republican was willing to talk about. And I think that reflects my own principled understanding of the problem, but also my ability to actually see that through.
So you alluded in that answer to the fact that when Trump ran in 2015, he ran as an outsider. He also, don't know if he used these exact words about national identity, but certainly by promising to make America great again, was speaking to that kind of craving for a new national identity or a national purpose. Do you think that he tried and failed in both of those, namely kind of eliminating the Washington establishment, reinstituting this vision, or is it that your vision of what you mean by a national identity is meaningfully different than what he meant by that?
Well, I think there was a moment for recognizing a problem that no one else recognized. Okay, and I think Trump did that, recognized the corruption of the media, recognized the actual administrative bureaucracy, what he and others called the deep state, the ability to recognize grievances that had previously not been aired in America. There was a time and place for that. But I think the time and place right now is for actual solutions of what we're going to do to address those grievances. And simply re-airing those grievances, well, then that gets old. Okay, that what became a challenge to the system becomes the new system at a certain point. And it takes a new outsider. As I said before, you get to be an outsider once. And I think that's a big part of what I'm bringing to the table here is, yes, I understand all of that in a deep way. And I consider myself actually an America First conservative. But to put America first, we need to rediscover what America is and actually have a vision for where we're going as a country. And so that's a big part of what I'm uniquely bringing to the table. And the other thing, Glenn, is I think we do face a choice. I think Republicans face a choice. I think Americans face a choice about whether we want to be on a path to a national divorce or whether we want to be on a path to a national revival. National divorce, I'm not making these words up. I mean, this is now part of the lexicon of both the left and the right. I worry that there are candidates who will lead us to a national divorce in different ways. Because first of all, we're not going to deliver national unity by showing up in the middle and saying, hey, can't we all hold hands and get along and compromise and sing Kumbaya? That ain't going to work. If there was ever a time when that was going to work, that ship has long sailed. I think our best shot at national unity is by embracing unapologetically the ideals that set America into motion, from meritocracy to free speech and open debate to self-governance over aristocracy. We can talk about more about those ideals, but embrace those ideals, which are extreme ideas. Those are radical ideas for most of human history. I think we unify this country by embracing the radicalism of those ideas, and that's our best chance at national unity. And so, if I was to even take it a step further, I think I'm running because I'm uniquely positioned as a candidate to actually deliver not only national unity, but a vision of what it means to be American for the next generation of Americans. I am the first millennial candidate that's ever run on the Republican ticket for U.S. president. I don't believe in identity politics of any kind, including age-based identity politics. But I do think that my unique set of experiences and the fact that I'm running on my unique vision for this country, not somebody else's, best positions me to get this job done, and that's why I'm running.
Right. So let me ask you about that vision. So I found it interesting in 2016 that when both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump ran for president, they essentially had a similar appeal, which is I'm not only running against the establishment ideology of the other party, namely the party of which I'm not a member, but also of my own party. Both of them said that, and Trump in particular was adamant that he opposed not just Bush-Cheney foreign policy, but even kind of the symbols of the Reagan era and Reagan economics. Not necessarily that it was wrong back then, but that it was kind of archaic for the new challenges. Some of the ideas that you just mentioned in your vision, like abolishing the Department of Education and being tough on immigration, have been very long-standing planks of Republican Party politics for decades. Those are not new ideas, at least in their broadest sense. So would you say that you are a candidate who is saying that you're running in part to challenge and undermine the Republican establishment? And if so, which specific parts of that establishment do you think need subverting or destroying?
So I'll answer. Those are actually two questions in there. One is, let's just take the abolishing Department of Education. Yeah, there's a difference between uttering the words and actually doing it. The Department of Education still exists. It still spends $80 billion a year in the United States. It is still the lurking source of wokeism in local schools because they use that money as a sort of a set of handcuffs, really, that they tie around local schools to adopt these one-sided ideologies. It tips the scales in favor of four-year gender studies majors in California instead of people to go through, say, two-year vocational programs to be a welder or a carpenter or a builder. And yet, why haven't Republicans done anything about it? This is where my own, I would say, understanding of the Constitution and experience as a business builder come in, which is to say that, you know what? Article 2 of the Constitution says that if there's a law that says there's a civil service protection and I can't fire somebody, or there's a law that says that even if this is going to be waste, fraud, and abuse, and I still have to spend it, that means that I don't actually run the executive branch of the government. So I take a strong constitutional view based in my deep-rooted constitutional conviction that Article 2 allows me to do what every other Republican who's born of the system would say that, oh, well, that's something you got to go to Congress for or whatever. No, I reject that. That's not the way Article 2 of the Constitution reads. If you run the executive branch of the government, you run the executive branch of the government. And that's a combination of my experience as a CEO and founder and business builder, but also somebody who has a scholarly understanding of the Constitution that I've written about, in countless other forums. And I'm a trained lawyer too. So I think that that's a unique combination that allows me to actually execute and see through what other Republicans lightly dance around. And, affirmative action, well, maybe that's been around for a long time too, but there has not been, to my knowledge, Glenn, a U.S. presidential candidate in history who has actually pledged to end affirmative action. I've said I'm going to do it. How do I know I'm going to do it? Well, that's one of the few things a president can easily do because it was created by executive order under Lyndon Johnson. If it was created by executive order, it could be ended by executive order. Now, I pushed the Trump people, including the Trump White House policy group, who could have actually ended this by executive order. They said it was a political hill they didn't actually want to die on. I don't have those inhibitions. And so I think that is something that's going to allow me to, yes, some of the things I'm saying have been pledges for a long time. Some of them are new. But I think my constitutional conviction is actually part of, in my experience as somebody who actually gets things done, is actually going to be something that allows me to see a lot of that through. To your next question about am I taking aim at the Republican establishment, you can already see that I already am. I mean, I called on Ronna McDaniel to release the criteria for the debates. Who would have ever thought? A radical idea, the idea that you actually publicly release the criteria for a primary debate. I don't think that's such a radical idea, but I think that elevating these ideas, I'm not unafraid to take on be it a Republican establishment, a Democratic establishment, a cultural orthodoxy, a federal government, reform of the Federal Reserve. I think I'm at furthest in front of this in terms of the entire field, talking about restoring a Federal Reserve whose mission is to actually, who would have ever thought, make the dollar a unit of measurement rather than playing this game of God, balancing unemployment and inflation that the Federal Reserve has done a terrible job of with a fat finger over the last 20 years. Actually, that gives us a lot of the banking crises or risks of banking crises we're seeing, not to mention stagnation of GDP growth. This is something that's not going to be done automatically. There's going to be an administrative bureaucracy that bites back. I've also said I want to lay off 90% of the employees in the Federal Reserve. There's 20,000 of them today. It should be more like 2,000 to get this narrower job done. But I think you have to have somebody who's unapologetic, not just in talking about this issue, not just in being the inverse of what Teddy Roosevelt would have worried about, someone who speaks loudly and carries a small stick. But unlike even Teddy or unlike a lot of other Republicans since, I think we live in a moment where we need somebody who speaks loudly and carries a big stick. And that's what I bring to the table.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.